Hello and welcome to the final day of Virtually 2024. This is Nomensa's free virtual web accessibility and inclusion conference, and happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day as well. I'm Mary, I'm your host for today, and I'm delighted to introduce you to some of the leading thinkers in accessibility and inclusive design. Today's talks have some great actionable insights, which I hope will inspire you to take them back into your day-to-day roles wherever you are. And we're thrilled to have people watching from all over the world, spreading that message even further. A tiny bit of housekeeping before we start. We're very grateful to MyClearText, who are providing our live captions. You can access these by clicking on the closed caption button at the bottom of your Zoom window. It might be in the 3 dots. Or alternatively, we have provided a stream text link in the chat for a fully adjustable page of captions, which will be coming to you very shortly. All sessions are being recorded and will be available publicly online shortly after the conference is completed this week. So, into today's talk. In this talk, we're going to be listening to Cornel Hrisca-Munn, Disability Manager at Lloyds Banking Group. He's discussing the importance of focusing on our inclusive efforts inwards. How can an organisation support a diverse customer base when internally their systems, technology and attitudes might be setting their own colleagues up to fail? Please do get involved in the discussion in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. Just make sure your chat settings are turned to everyone in the blue box and not panelists and hosts so that everybody can see your messages. And if you have any questions you'd like us to answer, please put them into the Q&A, which is a different box at the bottom. I'll try and get through as many as I can at the end of the session. As I said, it will be recorded. We'll be sending out videos on YouTube of this week's talk as soon as they're ready after the event. That's enough from me, and I will gladly hand you over to Cornel.
Thank you so much, Mary. Appreciate that. It's good to be here. Good to be here today and discussing the thoughts around getting your own house in order first. So the subtitle for this is Colleague Accessibility and its Fundamental Relationship to Customer Engagement. And by customer engagement, I mean, how can we make our customer services, products, outgoings, marketing, information, you name it, more accessible and inclusive, and how that is tied into how an employee's colleague base will be accessible. So a little bit about what to expect today. I'm going to go through some introduction and some principles around this topic and what I'm going to be looking at. We're going to look at some colleague journeys, so attracting disabled talent, and hopefully that's right from the beginning of a disabled candidate's journey into an organisation, right the way through to them thriving and progressing. We're going to look at colleague journeys as well, retaining and progressing disabled talent as well. So the retention of disabled talent is important. Arguably, the promotion of disabled talent is even more important than that. Then we're going to cover some assistive and accessible technology, what that means and how we can mitigate risks and how that relates to our customer engagement as well if we get our colleague accessibility and our colleague accessible tech right. And just for good measure, I've included some assistive tech that looks like it's from the 1980s on this slide, just to whet our appetites. And at the end, I'm going to be summarizing top 10 points in no particular order, looking at colleague and customer, the inclusive relationship. So without further ado, let me introduce where we're going to be going with this. So a bit about myself. That is a very cheesy picture of me behind my beloved Sonar SQ2 drum set, which I acquired last year. I am currently the Group Disability Manager at Lloyds Banking Group, but previously I was the Senior Manager for Colleague Accessibility Technology Products. What I have done is build up my expertise and reputation and tried to build up the way I understand the relationship between both colleague and customer provisions when it comes to accessibility, working on both sides, and that's reflected in my career too. I began my career in recruitment. I became an SME in inclusive resourcing and people policy. And then from there, I've worked in various different accessibility roles. So I've been a local authority lead. I've been a national lead for disability with the DWP. I was a rail accessibility manager. I was a global chair of an international disability and accessibility and inclusion board across 15 plus countries. I've been a disability charity CEO, and I've been an independent accessibility consultant and advisor. And I still do a bit of that because I quite enjoy that. I enjoy telling people about how they can be more accessible and inclusive in their organizations, living and breathing it, really. I'm also a professional musician when I get the time. I'm a drummer. I was privileged to be the UK Drum Off champion in 2020 and 2021. and I was a global drum off finalist because of that. I'm a bass player as well, session musician. I've been a house band drummer and bass player for Channel 4's The Last Leg, and I've been a digital content creator. So shameless plug for my socials here. I've got about 100,000 combined subscribers and about 10 million plus views. So Cornel Munn on pretty much any of the major social media platforms, and you'll find me doing what I think I love doing most in the world, that's playing music. I'm a husband and a father. My boy is 2 next week, and he is every bit a toddler, but I love him to bits. I'm also a disabled person. I got no lower arms, which if I hold them up, you can see. I've surprised many an interviewer on virtual interviewers when they actually saw me in person, if they only saw me above the shoulders in a job interview, for example. But I also have an amputated right leg on which I wear a prosthetic leg. People ask me why I don't wear prosthetic arms. I don't like them. Tried them, don't like them. Cumbersome, heavy. I'm sure there's better technology now than when I tried it, but not for me. And where did I begin along this journey of my career? I was an Oxford University graduate, but really I felt like I was held back in my career. And that was honestly primarily due to attitudinal barriers due to my disability. And I'm going to go into that a bit later about what barriers we face as disabled people on the colleague journey and how that can impact your customer journey as well. Here is the controversial but very wise Richard Branson here talking about employees and customers. So his famous quote, "Your employees are your company's real competitive advantage. They're the ones that make the magic happen, so long as their needs are being met." So we're going to explore a little bit about how we meet the needs of specifically disabled colleagues, how we meet accessibility needs, how we meet inclusion needs. And also another quote from Richard Branson I've put on the C also. "The way you treat your employees is the way they will treat your customers." We're going to explore a little bit about when we have employees that represent vast, diverse communities, looking at the disability space here specifically, they have a lot of the empathy and lived experience that will then go on to shape the customer treatment and provision that we provide for a diverse and inclusive customer base here. So I thought I'd start with somebody much more well-versed in business than me, with Richard Branson. We're going to look at the principles of inclusive design. And I do this day in, day out at my job at Lloyds. I speak to business areas, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, senior leaders about inclusive design, accessibility, and innovation. And this first one is, the principle is inclusive design equals innovation. So I like to start my presentations off as thus. What do an electric toothbrush, a smart speaker, and a drop curb all have in common? And we get lots of answers. We get they're good products, really general stuff, right the way through to they're accessible, all the way through to they all invented in the last 20 years, which I don't believe is true of the drop curb actually. But the actual answer is that all of these products, the electric toothbrush, the smart speaker, and the drop curb, were all designed with the purpose of improving accessibility and inclusion for disabled people. That was their purpose originally, their intended means of design. That's why they were designed. But they've since become mainstream and actually, in a lot of ways, are seen as superior products to what came before them. So when talking about our colleague technology and what I did in my previous role at Lloyds, I'm talking to product managers, product owners, lab owners, senior people saying, if we make our products and services accessible for our colleagues, how do we know that we won't stumble across that next big thing, that next innovation, that next incredible tool that actually everybody will be using, not just one community? And we would have done that because we were designing inclusively from the beginning, which leads me on to my next point, the principles baking in inclusive design from the beginning. So imagine that you're baking a cake. Your ingredients are prepared. The cake is in the oven. Shock horror, you see you've left the eggs out on the side. I don't know how you'd have whisked up the batter for the cake, but there we go. You've left your eggs on the side. You haven't put them in. Now your cake comes out the oven, and it's too late to add the eggs. And this is what happens when you don't embed inclusive design early on. It could become costly, having to go back, unpick lots of work, people's time, different products that need to be unpicked from sometimes inherently at their base. And it can actually be impossible sometimes. If you are looking in the oven, your cake's in the oven, you've seen your eggs on the side, it's far too late to add the eggs then. And you know that your product's not going to be as good. And it might be the case you have to go completely back to the start. And that is the problem that we have when we don't bake in inclusive design from the beginning. And that's something that I'm urging all of the senior stakeholders that I talk to do, and to have that implemented within their products to assist colleagues within an organization. And the third principle, one which I'm sure many of you are absolutely familiar with, and that is the nothing about us without us. And I like that that's the primary commandment of inclusive disability work. As a person who's got a degree and master's degree in philosophy and theology, that language appeals to me. A primary commandment. I like commandments, precepts, and all those sorts of things. So what does it mean now? I'm sure we've heard it lots. It's disabled people leading the conversation on accessibility from the start and throughout. It means disabled people in leadership roles. That's something I'm going to touch on a little bit later on. It means that there is no substitute for lived experience. Now, one thing I like to appeal to when I'm developing focus groups, assembling product teams, doing my accessibility work, I like the hybrid of being selective and inclusive. There's no substitute for lived experience, but that doesn't mean that you compromise on someone's skill set. Let's change our mindset and understand that disabled people also have a diverse range of skill sets. The person who has the lived experience of disability or inaccessibility could also be the person that has the technical skills, has the coding skills, has the programming skills to make that happen. And I like to find that happy balance of people with those skills as well as with the lived experience. You're not sure how to make your customer service more accessible and inclusive? The answer may be closer than you think. And we'll look at data sharing on disability as well a little bit later on through this presentation. But what I mean by that is, have we looked inward? Are we trying to find a solution? Has a customer complained? Is a customer not able to access some of our services? What's going on? And actually, how do we know that there's not somebody within our own business that can help that, because they've experienced that exact problem as a customer, and they're now a colleague. They are now an asset to an organization and a problem solver. And that leads me on to the colleague journeys, attracting disabled talent. Why? Why do we bother? What's the point? It seems like almost an offensive question to ask on the start of it, but actually I think we need to look into this and delve a bit further. And this first point touches on what I just mentioned. Disabled people are natural problem solvers. We navigate a world not built for us, yet we so often thrive anyway. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we must accept these systems that aren't built for us, but that I think is a slightly different conversation. But what it does mean is that, for example, myself with my prosthetic leg, I will find the most efficient way to do things, from getting dressed in the morning right the way through to walking through a certain town and different routes that I take because I need to. But I'm now very good at that. I'm very good at route planning. I'm very good at routine planning. I have those sorts of skills that I would say are above average compared to somebody that doesn't have the same lived experience of disability in their everyday life. And that can be amazing when applied to business processes or technical problems or social and engagement issues. Having those people in our business is invaluable. Disabled colleagues are also disabled customers. Now, that's particularly keen from where I've come from in Lloyds Banking Group. So disabled colleagues treat disabled customers as they would want to be treated as customers, because they know what it feels like. They've been through it. Now, all LBG colleagues have bank accounts from the Lloyds Banking Group, various within there. So actually that means all us employees are also customers of the people that we're working for by default. And that's key to remember when it comes to looking at disabled talent. A lot of them might be customers as well. And a lot of them will treat disabled customers the way that they know that they will want to be need to be treated. They would have been through the inaccessible websites. A lot of our disabled colleagues would have been through the not being able to enter a store, not being able to click on this, not having their assistive technology work with a piece of tech from an organization. And they'll be able to treat the disabled customers in the way that they knew they would want to be treated. Representation, and with this comes reputation. You better believe that disabled people are more likely to buy from people like us. I know that I'm very excited about disabled-owned businesses. One of the exciting things I'm working on currently is the the government's Lilac review and Lloyds Banking Group are partnering with that to create the disability code to assist disabled entrepreneurs and business owners. And that's fantastic, because I think that's a real shot in the arm, not only for the UK economy, but for disabled people as consumers, as well as business owners and employees of businesses too. And communication. What if there's a communication barrier with your customers? Maybe there's a team member who's DDEF and they know BSL, or maybe they use a screen reader, or maybe they use Easy Read. But imagine the joy that a customer will experience when communicated with in their preferred way and inclusively, when they may have experienced barriers elsewhere. And the likelihood of that is much greater if you have the disabled people within your organization that can do that and that use these tools and communication methods day in, day out. How? So we've established the why. I think there's some quite good reasons, and actually that I think I could have done 20 slides on the good reasons for attracting disabled talent, but we'll move on to the how. And I think the first thing you want to do, you want to demonstrate that you're an inclusive employer. This is where disabled people will feel welcome and they'll belong, and that can come through accreditation. So one of these is the Disability Confident accreditation. I used to lead on this for the DWP within Wales, and the amount of businesses that were keen to sign up was very good, but also the amount of people who were disabled customers who were looking out for where they were going to buy from. They were looking to buy from a business that was disability confident. And it was a lot of people. Initially, when the scheme launched, already from launch, it was that disabled people were 20% more likely to buy from disability confident accredited businesses. But now it's even more than that. It's around it's between 40 and 60%. It's fluctuated over the last few years. Even though that the Disability Confidence Scheme is actually an employer-based accreditation, and it's to do with employees and how we treat colleagues within an organisation. And yet customers who aren't employees of the organisation are more attracted to buy and shop with and use the services of disability confident organisations. And there's also good news stories. I love hearing a good news story about how an organisation has promoted from within. A disabled person from within has made a senior manager grade, or an organisation has created a new product that is specifically for disabled people, but is really revolutionising the market. And of course, prominent disabled leaders. So I'm privileged to be part of a group that has a chief operating officer who is blind, and that is an unbelievable achievement that we shout about. The fact that we have to shout about it and that it's not the norm is still troubling for me, and I think that can really prove a powerful tool for making industry changes, both on a colleague and customer point of view. So what about making a job advert standing out for disabled candidates? Where are you advertising, first of all? So are you advertising with inclusive job boards? Are you advertising in places where there might be more disabled people going? Are you targeting correctly? Is your language inclusive? So this goes wider than disability, of course, but within the language being inclusive, are we using correct, up-to-date terms? Are we taking time to listen to our disabled stakeholders, to write correctly, to write in such a way that attracts disabled people to our job adverts? And are images used representative of the diverse disabled community? Now, even in this presentation so far on some of the slides, I've used wheelchair users, and that is what people associate with disabled people. But what about that person with the hearing aid? What about that person who uses a different mobility aid? The person with a learning disability or difficulty? There are so many different people in the disabled community. It is the community is as diverse as the people within it and as the impairments that exist. And so making that concerted effort to provide that representation is going to make your job advert stand out. Partner with expert organizations. So that means listening to expert voices and adopting that nothing about us without us mantra. There are some fantastic disabled-led recruitment organizations. And actually they can support with an already willing, able and skillful bank of fantastic candidates ready to go. Have leaders talking about disability. So we hear business leaders talking positively about disability inclusion in the colleague and customer realms. We have that at Lloyds Banking Group, which is absolutely fantastic. And it's even better if those leaders themselves are disabled. When you see a disabled person talking about the difference that they're making internally for their colleagues, but also what provision they're putting out for customers, because they have that lived experience and they truly understand it. And that's a powerful tool for your business. It's a powerful tool for attracting disabled talent. and it's a powerful tool for customers. Revisit that job description. This is a learning curve, really. So is the job description written in plain English? An example, is having a driving license really essential for an office job? So that's about the skills required. Are required skills explained? Or is it just business jargon? Does anybody actually know what delivery at pace even means? So it's really key to revisit that job description and really try and eliminate as much exclusion as possible. If there's something that really isn't required for the role, for example, a driving license, but it just might be difficult for someone to get there, does it really need to be in there? Because it really could put off some really fantastic candidates from even applying. And of course, audit your recruitment process. So the recruitment process. Here's some top tips for an inclusive recruitment process. The first one is the most important one and is really where all the others should flow from. Consult with disabled people on the recruitment process. Nothing about us without us. That runs through the entirety of this presentation, but also really through accessibility and inclusion in general. Offer adverts, descriptions, and interview materials in accessible formats. So think about that format that could come in audio. Could it come in easy read? Could it come in Braille? Is it online or is it just in paper? Could it come in various different ways? Offer reasonable adjustments from the start. So that means within the job advert, mention about reasonable adjustments. We can offer them for the interview process and throughout, right the way through to potential job offer. Send out the interview questions in advance. Now, I don't really know why companies are so averse to doing this. It allows for candidates, like in a real job setting, to prepare what they'll be presenting on, to prepare the way that they would be communicating within a job in a work manner. I think it's actually a much more realistic skill than how people have to think on their feet, for example, to think of an answer that won't be as high quality as if they've had time to prepare it. Ensure buildings for interviews are accessible. Now, I know a lot more interviews are taking place digitally, which I think is generally fantastic, but still, we still do some face-to-face interviews. Ensure that they're in accessible rooms, step-free, easy to get to. Think of transport links as well. Is it only accessible by car, or can you get there via public transport? And is it step-free? Is the temperature all right? Is this included as well in your reasonable adjustments process for interview, the actual premises being considered? Ensure digital platforms for interviews are accessible. On a website, do they meet WCAG 2.1, now 2.2? Can they be read by screen readers? And a really key aspect to this is, can you get disabled stakeholders within your organization to in-person test the digital platform that you're running interviews on? Does it work with their assistive technology? That's a really key thing to get people internally to test that as stakeholders to make sure the process is accessible. Offer more time if needed. We take more time in work. I know I talked about delivery at pace earlier, but you might need more time for somebody to prepare or between questions. And offering that's really inclusive for a lot of people. Communicate that workplace adjustments will be available from day one. I'm talking about offer here. And from that means that we ensure that as close to our offer as possible, reasonable adjustments, at least in the interim, are agreed. There might be more tweaking. We remember that reasonable adjustments and workplace adjustments, these are living processes. So it means we don't close the book on them. They might evolve through time, through a candidate's journey. But if we ensure that they are available from day one, that's key for disabled colleague attraction. And ensure line managers and colleagues are well trained and have experience in disability inclusion, and include disabled people on interview and selection panels. Now, if this is an accessibility role, I think this should go with as a given, quite frankly. But what about other roles outside of accessibility? I don't see many disabled people on interview panels for roles outside of accessibility and disability roles. And I think that would be something that not only improves representation, but also improves a business's process, what we're asking, how we're doing our processes, if we have a disabled person involved in the recruitment process and on the interview panel. So hopefully we've now interviewed and onboarded and attracted all these wonderful disabled colleagues. Fantastic. But how do we keep them? And actually, more importantly, how do we progress them? So as we've talked about, the reasonable adjustments are agreed and sourced as close to the offer as possible. Did you know that the average workplace adjustment cost within a candidate per role is only £70? And often that comes with support, such as access to work, and actually it's often free. So frequently it's either a hybrid working arrangement or time off for appointments or a reduction or change in hours, for example. So many reasonable adjustments are free. It more often than not doesn't mean heavy infrastructure changes. And actually, I'll talk about why it's actually better to strategically get on the front foot with this anyway. Empower the colleague to lead the onboarding journey in terms of their accessibility needs. Well, onboarding is very complicated often. Lots of new systems to learn, HR processes, permissions for different aspects of a digital estate in an office, etc., etc. But what if we gave the colleague the power to design that journey? What if they led their accessibility needs? What if it was a needs-based accessibility journey into a new role that would set them up to succeed from the start? And I'd encourage all of us to look at that and see how we could engage our colleagues from the start on an onboarding process. Line manager training. So we ensure line managers are open. Are they welcoming? And do they instigate a sense of belonging for disabled people? So there's appropriate language. Make sure that disabled people are referred to appropriately. I know that one of my pet hates is avoiding euphemistic languages, such as special needs, things like that. We want to make sure that they understand that disability and disabled is not a dirty word. And that starts with being open and honest, I think, and actually having these honest conversations is great. So a great dialogue between the disabled colleague and a line manager is key here. Look at attitudes for flexible working. COVID, although devastating for a lot of people, and especially the disabled community, also has opened up opportunities in the career space for some people who weren't able to commute long distances to roles, or now benefit hugely from hybrid and even completely remote working. And what about understanding responsibilities? So a line manager's job at the start of it, when it comes to day-to-day content for their colleagues, their team, is to turn that job description and the responsibilities into a reality. And so being able to communicate that effectively in a variety of different ways to different people is key. Reasonable adjustment passports, a lot of organisations do these. So ensure there's a living document and an open dialogue between colleague and line manager with clear escalation points if required. We hope that no line manager would cause any problems, but they might do. It might be the case where a colleague wants to go confidentially higher up or escalate something without their line manager knowing. What if the line manager is the problem? We hope they wouldn't be, but it's possible. And also, we need somewhere that they can go and troubleshoot any of their reasonable adjustments. A clearly marked reasonable adjustments, workplace adjustments team or centre point of contact where this can be addressed. That's really important within an organisation. And if you can't find that internally or don't have the budget for it internally, my hint is find budget, but also lots of external organisations can help, including the government's Access to Work scheme, which isn't just for funding for disabled colleagues, it's also a source of help. You can get somebody that will come in and assess a workplace for an individual, for a disabled person, and make their own recommendations of what would be good workplace adjustments for them. My key takeaway from the workplace adjustments conversation is that strategic inclusion is better than constant workplace adjustments. So workplace adjustments are often necessary, but really it's better to design a workplace inclusively for all. You limit exclusion systematically through digital audits, process audits, premises accessibility audits, and disabled-led initiatives that tackle any exclusion and problems at source. So that means that a workplace improves for everybody, not just for the individual who might be receiving reasonable adjustment. Workplace adjustments can be more costly if not done strategically, and it's a real cost saving if your workplace is designed from the ground up to be inclusive. And word spread fast. These inclusive places to work with innovative technology that uplift everybody, you're going to want to apply there, and you're going to attract the best talent by doing so. And you're going to keep them there. You're not going to give them a good reason to leave. And invest in training and development of disabled people, qualifications and promotions. So the progression side of things. Big question, where are all the disabled line managers, heads of departments and directors? So with 25% of UK business leaders surveyed saying they wouldn't hire a disabled person, and significantly more than that, saying that they wouldn't hire a disabled person into leadership positions. It really is little wonder how we see so few disabled senior leaders. So what do we do about it? I, for one, want to do something about it. And I mentioned earlier about disability information sharing. We want to foster a culture of disability declaration. Now, I use the term declaration. Some organizations use the term disability disclosure. I don't love that term because it seems to imply something is hidden and you want to hide something. For example, you disclose criminal convictions. Disability is something that we just want to declare or want to share. And we want to foster a culture that allows us to do that. So actually, that might mean already you may have more disabled leaders than you think. You just don't know it. And the more leaders who share disabilities, the more role models are created for future disabled leaders. It just grows, it snowballs. We want to ensure that development activities are equitable. So ask these questions. Is the face-to-face training in an accessible building? Is the e-learning digitally accessible, up to WCAG standards and compatible with assistive technology? Is the money being spent on the development of disabled colleagues, especially in relation to their non-disabled peers? How many times have we looked at that? We have the disability pay gap that exists, but what exists in the disability investment gap? How much are we, as business leaders, accessibility professionals, organizations, investing in our disabled employees? Does it match up to those of their non-disabled peers? What is the gap there? I think it's time for us to have a really long, hard look at that. Ensure the accessibility of management tools. This is something which has come up in a few organizations I've worked at, that to be promoted into certain roles, you have to be a line manager, for example. But what if the tools aren't accessible to you? Is your management information accessible? Does your talent management solution work with assistive technology? So, for example, can you use your talent management solution as a disabled person with a screen reader? Can you look at the team that you'd be managing? Can you manage their absence? Can you manage all that with the assistive technology that you might use? Or is there a barrier there? This is just a small part of the question. Are disabled colleagues given appropriate tools to succeed as leaders? And of course, I think we still need to myth bust. We need to empower disabled colleagues. We know that it's wrong to say this person can't do the job because they're from, and you can insert any protected characteristic in there. So why is it still acceptable, even if it's a bit more shamed these days, to say this person can't do their job because they're disabled? Because it is still acceptable, and I've still heard it. I think we need to challenge that and make it unacceptable and understand that the diversity of disabled people, their skill set and their capabilities. And of course, top down is powerful. A director with a disability can influence the entire direction of a business. They can foster a culture of inclusion and reputation which doesn't go unnoticed by the customer. So we look at the accessible and assistive technology on offer. And I want to highlight an issue that can happen with assistive tech within larger organizations. First of all, did you know you may already have more accessible and assistive technology that you think, and you might be using it? So within Microsoft systems, Microsoft's accessibility, their provision is now available in your system level settings in Windows 11. That's a really big change for Windows 11, that all the accessibility system level stuff is in one place. So within that, you've got your text size, visual effects, magnifiers, voiceovers, narrators, contrast themes, all sorts of things that can assist with accessibility, embedded right within your own machine if you're using Windows 11. There's the fantastic accessibility checker tool. Now, this exists within each Microsoft 365 product, and it highlights errors, which essentially are the most severe things for accessibility. They highlight errors in a document mean that a lot of people using assistive tech or have accessibility needs or are disabled simply won't be able to interact with your document. These things need fixing ASAP. Then there's warnings, which means that there are defects within a document or product that could really exclude a large percentage of disabled people. And then there's tips. You might have done the bare minimum, but tips looks at good, better, and best practice for creating documents accessibly and inclusively within Microsoft 365. And there's the fantastic Microsoft Disability Answer Desk, an enterprise disability answer desk. Now, this is essentially an email address, which I'm very happy to share afterwards. And the DAD is primarily for private users, and the EDAD is primarily for business users. And what they do is they are on hand to support with Microsoft accessibility, but also they take suggestion on improvements. And I got a fantastic story from one of my roles in Lloyds Banking Group, when we had a colleague who wanted to interact with teams in a different way, but often was non-verbal. It would come and go, but sometimes they were non-verbal within meetings. And they wanted something that would not only act as a reader for them, but would not only allow them to interact in the chat, but would read out something when they put their hands up as if it was a voice speaking. Suggested that to Microsoft Teams, and they've taken that Teams engineers have taken that away and are building that into their product roadmap for certain types of Microsoft Teams applications. So that's a really exciting story of how a colleague can have an issue. We report it to the big tech companies and they do something about it. And that's why it's important to have the understanding of assistive technology and also engaging with the people on the ground that are using it. Now, a top tip for Microsoft accessibility is when to make your documents more accessible for colleagues using assistive technology, we want to foster a culture of all colleagues enabling accessibility checker at the start and throughout of the creation process, which means that they're making accessible documents and content as they go along. You don't need to go back and unpin. You can bake that conclusion earlier in the process. Then there's Apple devices as well. We embedded into system level settings on MacBooks, iPads, and iPhones are a wealth of accessibility features. So from screen readers, there's Seeing Eye apps, and there's fully customizable recognition controls. Am I still presenting? Apologies. I think I heard a noise then. Yes, I am. That's good. Apologies for that. I thought I heard a noise that I'd stopped presenting. Let me continue to where I was. Apologies for that. Let's carry on. So Apple devices, they've been at this for years, Apple have, and they've got embedded system level features on MacBooks, iPads, and iPhones. And I was talking about the screen readers, Seeing Eye apps, which are available on iPhone as well. So Seeing AI is fantastic. Even though that is a Microsoft product, it's available on Apple devices. And actually, fully customizable facial gesture controls on devices. So Apple's got a wealth of features to unlock. I had a fantastic time in their very nice, very glamorous Battersea Power Station offices, where they were showcasing the accessibility features on their MacBook. And I learned essentially to control a MacBook just with my face. I was able to wink at it to move folders. I was able to stick my tongue out and it would double click. And you can assign all these customized facial features and facial gestures to anything you like, really. And it's remarkably intuitive. I think within 15 minutes, I was able to use a device as quickly using these facial gestures as I would have done with a standard keyboard, touchpad, mouse interaction. So I recommend as an additional resource to Apple devices, go away and watch the I Am the Greatest video. It gives a really cool 2-minute overview. It's quite emotive as well. It's like real people, real disabled people's stories of how they interact with Apple products and how Apple products support them in navigating the world around them and thriving successfully. So accessible and assistive technology, we continue. So looking at screen readers and other embedded user technology. I think most of us might know what screen readers are, but they're often used by blind and visually impaired people using audio to read out text. So there's some considerations here. So using alternative text, that's a key. We need to embed our images with alt text so that they are read by screen readers and don't just read up a gobbledygook file name, for example. A key tip here is not to use images exclusively to convey meaning as well. We want to use text to convey meaning, especially longer meanings and longer pieces of text. We don't want to just stick it in an image. Without alt text, that would be excluding a lot of people using screen readers, but also it's much better practice just to use text to convey text and to convey more meaning. Compatibility with organizational estate software and products. That's a key thing. Have we tested a user screen reader with the products that we use in an organization if they're a colleague. Now, a solution I've heard as a workaround, I've heard two solutions as a workaround, which neither were good. One of them was, oh, if this screen reader doesn't work with this part of our digital estate, we'll get someone else to do that job, that part of the job. Well, that's not acceptable, quite frankly. And also, oh, we have inbuilt screen readers on Microsoft or on Apple products. The colleague doesn't need to use their own screen reader. Well, screen readers can be very personal things, much like other mobility aids, for example, like wheelchairs. Wheelchair users have their own wheelchairs. Screen readers, to people that use them, can be very personal. They've got their own settings logged into them. They've got their own way of working. They navigate in a certain way that the user likes. So just dismissing it as we've got a product in-house that will work with it isn't going to work. We need to make sure that an individual's assistive technology will match up with the estate that we have in our workplace. Support is a key one as well. So we look at what support can our IT system offer. Do we know what they can give to somebody with a screen reader? And I'll look at that a little bit later. Now, bespoke product and app updates impacting screen reader capability. So this is a bit more general to assistive technology, but there's been issues with screen readers in various organizations I've worked at. So larger organizations take note. With so many bespoke technical applications and products used in businesses, especially in complex businesses like financial services and large ownership groups, these can often update automatically. But these can throw out accessible and assistive technology, and then they'll require rescripting. So you could have automatic updates running over the weekend on a bespoke financial product that the wider team doesn't know about. Monday morning, somebody turns up and they have a screen reader. Suddenly, it doesn't work with that bespoke financial management product within their workplace. That is a problem. That is a problem that I've seen time and time again. But I think there are ways that we can help mitigate these issues. We want to embed accessibility considerations into contracts with third-party suppliers of apps and products. So we want to know from the start, when we're embedding third-party products for colleagues, what is their rescripting policy? When do the updates happen? And actually, is the product itself WCAG compliant? Is it standards compliant? And is any future update going to also have that same level of compliance? And I think if we can embed that into our contracts, we mitigate a lot of the risks for that and have great third-party relationships, encouraging buyers and suppliers to become more inclusive along the way. But that can't always happen, and that hasn't always happened. And we have a lot of legacy products that may not have had that introduced into their contracts. So we need to think of practical mitigations. Communicating app updates to the business area in advance, allowing users of assistive technology to raise issues and fixes that have been found. One thing that I would do in the organization, in one of my organizations I worked in, is hold weekly meetings where we looked at our Microsoft estate and our bespoke products, and I would give an update to the wider teams what was coming, and they could tell me whether there'd be a rescripting and whether that would, or an update, and that would require updates to the assistive technology and if it would work or not. Granted, only once a week, things did happen in the interim, but it mitigated a lot of the issues and meant that none of the issues weren't at least looked at for more than, weren't left not looked at for more than a week at a time, for example. Monitor automatic updates, particularly from third-party suppliers, so there are no surprises the next day for staff using assistive technology. And the big tip that I alluded to, ensure that IT support are familiar with assistive technology, how it works, and how to provide fixes effectively. Now, one thing I've been working with our colleague IT support services desk, upskilling them on disability and how assistive technology works. Now, funnily enough, the biggest thing I hear from various IT teams is that their biggest barrier in supporting people with assistive technology and disabled people is actually confidence. Not necessarily technical confidence, but even communication methods of, alternative accessible communication methods with disabled people. And I think it's key that we challenge that and provide that uplifted confidence by having conversations with disabled people. But also it's important for IT support staff to see how these things work. So, for example, if somebody needs to command a screen remotely to fix an issue, that's great. But if someone needs to describe an issue on the screen and they're using a screen reader, it's important that an IT service desk person is familiar with that, as they might say, can you click on the top left of your screen? Well, for somebody who is visually impaired or blind using a screen reader, that doesn't mean an awful lot when a screen reader reads out linearly but doesn't give locations on a screen. So understanding that disparity and making the communication easier between the two and understanding how this assistive tech works will allow your colleague IT teams to support effectively and confidently and provide fixes quickly in an equitable way as to people who don't use assistive technology or to non-disabled peers as well. Now, accessible and assistive technology breeds innovation. We talked about this with the smart speaker, the electric toothbrush, and the drop curb. And one example I have this was an organization I was working with as their accessibility lead. One department was having an overhaul of their digital systems, and it was a customer-facing department. But the important thing to do was to ensure that all colleague systems met assistive tech and accessibility standards. So I led on the delivery of that, and that implemented embedding screen readers for people that needed them, as there were a couple of people in the team that were blind or visually impaired. And as the system moved to a more digitally inclusive standard, the screen readers were implemented on colleague devices. And we found something that was quite remarkable. A big part of this team's jobs was to manage customer service and to process payments. Now, one thing that we found was these payments and payment details were very, very long, and it was a very arduous process. But the screen readers picked these up and was able to output the information automatically, and essentially was a tool that could essentially process these payments. So what we had there was an example of assistive and accessible technology being an innovative, much quicker resolution to this payment processing. It also empowered the people that used it. The blind and visually impaired people quickly were able to become SMEs and managers of this process, using their own screen readers, which they were experts in, to dramatically improve times and efficiency in payment payment processing. Now, not only was this good internally, this also improved improved and made a fantastic customer experience, to which feedback was received from it, how much quicker payments were processed and services were able to be provided, all coming from assistive and accessible technology originally implemented for a colleague. So there's a very clear relationship there of how colleague accessibility has impacted customers for the positive. So colleague and customer, an inclusive relationship. This is where I slowly begin to wrap up and give my top 10 reflections on this relationship between colleague and customer and accessibility, and how one is really interdependent and relying on the other. So some of these things we've covered, and some of these things I'll provide a little bit more insight. Colleagues are often customers. We've already discussed that colleagues will use an employer's services. For example, all Lloyds Banking Group employees have a Lloyds Banking Group product. We've all got Lloyds bank accounts or Halifax bank accounts or something like that. The recruitment process. Now, this is a reflection of an organization's marketing for customers. So adverts, language, audience, reputation, and attitudes to inclusion, all through a job advert, act as a public-facing piece of marketing that, yes, is made to attract colleagues, but also will be a great advert for your customers if you do it right. Internal accessibility and inclusion empowers people to do their jobs well. If colleagues are unable to do their jobs, they are unable to support the organization's customers, and therefore customer service will slip. Customer standards will slip. People may go elsewhere and it won't work. So if we have not set people up with the tools to do their jobs well, and that often means accessibility tools, they won't be able to support customers effectively. Disabled colleagues have lived experience and expertise. So this means that the experience of disabled customers who are interacting with that organization will be much improved. A disabled customer comes in with a problem, comes online with a problem, sends in an email with a problem. Chances are, if we have a diverse disabled colleague base, someone may have experienced that themselves, or may have assisted somebody that has experienced that, and will be able to provide that expertise and that support for that customer much faster, with much greater accuracy and much greater empathy. And related to that, SMEs on the inside provide invaluable knowledge for inclusive customer provision. Why would we go to external sources of provision when the skills and knowledge could exist internally within an organization? It's much cheaper to use people that internally rather than going to a separate organization, a separate agency. Now, I do caveat, if you're going to do that, please do pay your internal colleagues fairly for their time and their expertise, if they're lived experience and experts on accessibility and inclusion. But isn't it much better to use the expertise that you have internally? Somebody that knows the organization, knows the customer base, but also knows about accessibility and inclusion to provide that provision, than it is to go to external sources. And linked to that as well, disabled colleague panels and individuals can shape research into accessibility provision, and that can save time and money compared to external research. With the caveat, please do pay disabled people with their lived experience, well and fairly, to impart that lived experience and education. Disabled colleagues can help with risk management. Now, often I shy away a little bit from talking about accessibility and inclusion in terms of risk, because I like seeing it in terms of positive. It's innovative, it's inclusive, it's fantastic for colleagues and customers, but there is a risk element to it. Now, a disabled colleague with lived experience of assistive tech, or with their career trajectory, how it might have gone, they are far more likely to spot inequality and or accessibility risk fast. And they potentially have some lived experience and expertise to help resolve the issue. Now we go back to that point of representation. Representation at all levels of an organization is vital. Disabled leaders can be role models for future disabled leaders, and can be one of the best sources of reputational success with a disabled customer base as well as colleague base. So really, we can't afford not to empower disabled people to become leaders. Internal accessibility innovations can improve experience for all, both colleagues and customers. And as we look back on the screen reader processing payments experience and the innovative products that we looked at that were designed for inclusive design but have improved life for everybody, this, I think, goes without saying. And finally, on my point here, disabled customers are extremely valuable. Now, the purple pound, which is the phrase affectionately used to refer to the spending power of disabled people, it's estimated to be worth £274 billion in the UK per year. And that emphasised how important accessibility and inclusion is in our customer base. 73% of online shoppers, they experienced an accessibility barriers on more than 25% of websites visited. And 4 in 10 disabled people say they can't visit local shops due to inaccessibility. What a huge loss of revenue. What a waste for us. What a waste of our customer base. And we want to invest money into our colleagues and customers. One thing that I've looked at internally recently is that people shy away from talking about the revenue and spending power of disabled people. There's a common misconception that actually we don't want to refer to disabled people as money making, because that seems like we're belittling them or we are talking unsympathetically. But really, as much as we might value them as people, what do we see customers as? Essentially, we wouldn't do what we do in business if we didn't think customers would make us money. And why should we treat disabled customers any differently? I know personally, I would rather be seen as a money-making, revenue-generating asset than simply a beneficiary of some DE&I or inclusion scheme. I'd much rather be seen equitably. And actually, if we pour money into disabled people as customers and understand that they're revenue generating, that's going to yield better results, because the more that we pour money into things, the more results that we get out of it. So I think it's key to break this myth of not wanting to see disabled people as money-making, revenue-generating assets, because that's how we see all customers. And I think it's my right as a disabled person to be seen as a revenue-generating asset and be treated as such. We must get this right for our customers. And to do so, we must make sure our house is all in order first. I think it's necessary, and I think it's impossible to deliver that inclusive customer service and experience without the lived experience problem-solving ability and internal expertise of disabled people working within an organisation. Thank you for listening. I do appreciate that, and I really do welcome any questions and bright ideas. I left my communication details on here if anyone wants to get in touch. I've got my personal email, my professional email on here, and my LinkedIn if you want to connect as well afterwards. And I'll be really keen to have more discussions and conversations with you about this afterwards as well. But thank you very much for your time today, and I think there might be time for some questions from Q&A. I will stop sharing my screen and we can go into that. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Cornel. That was so insightful. I really loved what you were saying about focusing on strategic inclusion first rather than, retrofitting those reasonable adjustments. We talk about that a lot as well in the accessibility space in general. So it was really nice to hear that focusing inward. We only have a couple of minutes, but if anyone does have an additional question, please feel free to put them into the Q&A and we can obviously take them offline as well. But I was going to just launch with one here that was really, really interesting, which was, do you have any advice for someone wanting to advocate for internal accessibility and inclusion who is coming up against pushback from senior management?
It's all about that innovation and revenue generation. It's two different things. So how is this going to benefit the business as a whole? First of all, from an innovation point of view, what tangible examples can you give as an advocate that these accessibility improvements are going to improve the business? Are they going to improve it for your hiring process, for your internal processes, for your tech that you're using internally? Mm-hmm. It's looking at that holistic thing, like the example that I gave of the electric toothbrush, drop curb, smart speaker, etc. What can we do for that? So first of all, it's that inclusive design piece. It's a challenge, but can you as an advocate discover what business benefits specific accessibility things will bring and then bring that to your management? Especially helps if you align them with business priorities as well. So if you align them, you find out your business leaders' priorities. And the second thing, see it as revenue generating. Where can this make money or where can this save money? So it's those two sided things: innovation for everybody against business priorities and revenue generation or saving money.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Second question, which will be the last one that we have time for today, is what about the public sector where it's not just about revenue generation? Do you have any insights as to how we can help convince management teams in non-revenue focused sectors, let's say?
Absolutely. So even if you're non-revenue generating, your business must run with efficiency. I've worked in the public sector in the civil service in various different roles, DWP, HMRC, local authorities, and quite frankly, you need to run quickly. You need to run things efficiently. You need to run things in such a way that serves the people quickly. If you can demonstrate that your accessibility and inclusion provision is going to improve that delivery, again, it's still the same principles as private sector without the revenue, against those business priorities. I know the civil service has success profiles for recruitment. Can you find an accessibility piece of provision that will improve the behavior side of things? Will it improve the technical expertise? Will it improve that delivery at pace? And also, I know I don't like to talk about too much, there's additional responsibilities placed on public sector organizations within the public sector equality duty of the Equality Act 2010, which actually requires by law public sector organizations to be industry leaders in accessibility, to go above and beyond what they accept from the private sector. So if the first thing doesn't work with the innovation, you say, well, you could be in breach of your requirements against the Equality Act because we need to go above and beyond in the public sector.
That's a really good way of thinking about it. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Cornel, for your time and your expertise. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And don't forget that our final talk of Virtually 2024 is at 3 p.m. today. We will have Derek Featherstone, who's going to be sharing his insights about implementing accessibility and disability inclusion in a number of different contexts as well. And he's going to give you some specific actionable tips so that you can start tomorrow to set yourself up for short and long-term success, which I feel like is going to be a really good segue on from your talk here, Cornel, as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We hope to see you later. Thank you a lot, and bye-bye for now.
Thank you so much.